Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of The World Wanderers. If you listened to last week's episode, you heard about our new sponsor, Italki, and we've got a really cool promo going on with them where if you sign up for your first lesson, you actually get your second lesson free. And Italki has been super, super valuable to both Ryan and I for learning languages, specifically Spanish. And you can find that at www.theworldwanderers.com/Italki.
And the show is also brought to you by you, the listener. If you want to support the World Wanderers and the continuing of creating high quality podcast episodes, you can go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers and you can support the show and get some cool stuff in return.
This episode of the podcast is about our road trip from Atlanta to Canmore. We're going to split it up into two different episodes, though, so we're not going to get all the way to Canmore today. We are going to start in Atlanta and drive through the U.S. with you.
Yeah, so we kick off with a clip from the sprawling metropolis of Conway, Arkansas, where we recap the first leg of our journey.
So yesterday was a Monday, and we left Atlanta for good.
Yes.
And made our way 6 hours?
About that.
6 hours to Memphis, Tennessee.
And now we are in...
somewhere in Arkansas.
the jewel of Arkansas.
Which is?
Conway.
Just a little bit outside of Little Rock. But to just back up a little bit, it felt pretty surreal for me to have the car all packed up and our apartment completely empty and leaving this place that's been home for so long now. How did that feel for you?
Yeah, it's a bit weird. It's kind of funny because, like, on one hand, we're moving home, which is kind of just like a thing that's very, like, to-do listy, just like a business-like thing. But the other hand, we're trying to do a road trip. So it's like kind of a balance between, like, having this car full of stuff and we're like, oh, we're just driving back home. And then on the other hand, like, oh, we're on our leisurely road trip, you know? It's kind of like it feels weird.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because, like, we still, you know, we've got podcast episodes to produce and we've got stuff that we actually need to do in the next couple weeks. So it's like, I guess, kind of a test to how well we do on the road. Well, actually podcasting, since we haven't traveled long term since starting the podcast, and that'll be sort of the next adventure after we get home, spend a little bit of time at home.
Yeah, and so our first stop was Memphis, Tennessee. The only thing we really knew about Memphis going in was that the chances were high of us getting our tires stolen off our car. Seemed to be the consensus.
Yeah, petty theft is like a big thing in Memphis, and so, you know, having a car full of stuff is a little bit worrisome. Obviously everything was fine and we would have mentioned it already, but we did stay at an Airbnb that was like it was a little bit outside of the city center, and I don't know, there was a part of me that at one point was like, I don't know about this area, but it ended up being fine.
Yeah, we ended up having a really good experience, both with our Airbnb restaurant we found for dinner. It was this cool Mexican place that it really had kind of like fused a lot of like southern cooking in with Mexican food.
Yeah, called Babalu.
And then we checked out Graceland on the way out, which is very much like an RV style destination, not a young person destination, but
I think though it's mostly because of the price.
Yeah.
So
I mean, also the content, like people don't know Elvis.
Don't they though? Like he's like the king of like the king of like rock and roll.
Yeah, but I'm sure if you like love Elvis, you're more likely to go to Graceland than if you're just like, oh, Elvis, you know.
I guess too, he was like died in 1977, so like much before our time. But I feel like his music's so classic that we didn't really see any other sort of like Gen ex-millennial type people. We saw one other couple that looked around our age, but everyone else was like significantly older. And it's kind of funny, I was telling my friend that we were going, and she told her husband, and he was like, don't only old people go to Graceland? So it's just kind of funny that it has that reputation. I thought it was pretty interesting, though. What did you think of the actual?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It's interesting to like be in Elvis's house and to find out more about him, because yeah, I really don't have much of a recollection other than like this kind of like Elvis impersonator thing. You know, you imagine this like fat man wearing this like weird white suit.
Yeah. It's funny because
ridiculous sideburn, dumb glasses.
Yeah, for my dad's 40th birthday, there was an Elvis impersonator, and that was like basically the exact situation, like fat man with fake sideburns and dark hair.
Yeah, so it is cool. The problem is just it is expensive. I think it costs basically like $40 each, and then it's just busy as hell. Like it feels like you're in a house party, and you're like you can barely move in some spots of the house.
It's funny because I feel like that's exactly what you said about Versailles, yeah, Palace of Versailles, like a house party, but you can't go everywhere. Nobody's having very much fun. It was kind of like that, though. Most of the areas are blocked off. You just have viewing points to things, like you can't walk around and touch things. And I think so the tours are like quote-unquote self-guided, but everyone gets an iPad where John Stamos talks you through the house. So everyone's at the same point.
Because
essentially.
you show up with like 20 people.
Yeah, and then so the people who are at the front of the pack are like standing there looking at the things that are being talked about, and the people at the back pack are like just kind of like listening to it while trying to look around people. But I did think it was interesting. Like it was cool to see, I don't know, like the old school style of the house that hasn't been updated, but to see like how nice it was. There was one area where there was shag carpet on the wall, which I thought was really neat.
Yeah, one other piece of interest that I thought was funny was on the iPad tour, there's a spot where it shows a bill for like the microwave. And they have a microwave which just looks like an average microwave, but it costs $650 in whatever year this was, like the 70s or something.
Yeah.
Which is kind of amazing to think about how far we've come technologically and how cheap all these household electronics are. It's not something rich people get. It's just something everyone can get if they want it.
Yeah, and so after finishing up with Graceland, we hopped back in the car, and we have been driving through Arkansas pretty much ever since then. I think we've got a couple more hours in Arkansas before we get into Oklahoma. What have your impressions of Arkansas been so far?
A lot of police, a lot of trees, and
a lot of fields.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, we finally found a Chipotle and a Starbucks, somewhere to eat and get a drink, and it seems like there wasn't very many places to stop along the highway. It doesn't seem to be a very populated state.
No.
So we'll check in a little bit later. So the last time that we checked in, we were in Conway, Arkansas, I believe, somewhere in the middle of Arkansas. And from Arkansas, we made our way into Oklahoma City. And the drive through Arkansas was surprisingly beautiful, don't you think?
Yeah, it was very green, rolling hills.
Yeah.
Trees.
Yeah, lots of trees and rolling hills, and just a lot more beautiful than I would have expected. There's sort of this like negative connotation about some of the states in the U.S., and I think Arkansas is one of those, like, oh, you're going to go to Arkansas? Like, there's nothing in Arkansas.
Do you think there's a negative connotation about Arkansas?
I think a little bit. I mean, if you're from Arkansas and you disagree, let us know. Totally open to that, because I know very little about Arkansas. But we made our way into Oklahoma and continued to find, like, rolling hills, a lot of greenery. I was like, wow, Oklahoma is also really beautiful. And we spent a night in Oklahoma City. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we reached out to a few couch surfing hosts before we'd started our road trip, and connected with someone in Oklahoma City. So we had our very first couch surfing experience in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, so we had been we'd hosted a couple couch surfers ourselves in Atlanta as a way to sort of build up a profile and just kind of see if it was something that would suit our needs, something that we would feel comfortable with. And Oklahoma City was the first chance that we actually got to try that out. Something that's kind of interesting about couch surfing is that it's actually really hard to find couch surfing. Like, it's something that I've spent a lot of time on and gotten very little result out of, which I guess is because it's free.
That's the thing. I think it's one of those things where you're like, oh, this is cool, I get to stay for free places, but you do have to put a lot of work in to finding them. And then when you do stay somewhere, a lot of times it's not like an ideal situation.
Yeah, so that's the thing is you have your profile, you want to present yourself as somebody who you truly are, but also somebody that is going to be interesting to other people. And then it's really important to look at people's profiles. So there's a couple things you look at. You look at the place, obviously, and then there's like how active they are. So it'll say like active in the last 2 weeks or active in the last day. Response rate is really key. And I found like when I was looking in Memphis, there was almost nowhere to stay. The one place I found, guy was like, active today, 100% response rate. Bam, that's amazing. Click on him, go to his profile. He's a nudist.
A what?
Nudist.
What does that mean?
I think that our listeners know what that means. It means somebody who has a naked home, which totally cool, but not our thing. So it's really important to look at a profile, read reviews, and then from the profile tab over, there's that My Home tab. So you find somebody who's got a really sweet profile, then you go over and they've got like a lazy boy, no pillows, no sheets. Maybe that's your thing, maybe it's not. For us being on the road all day, it's not really ideal to not really sleep. But I think we were really fortunate with our host in Oklahoma City that we had a sweet couch to stay on, and it was a pretty good setup. Him and his roommate were both super cool, and I thought it was a really enjoyable experience.
Yeah, we were really lucky to found cool, kind of like mid-20s guys who were hosting couch surfers. They had a really nice, comfy couch. Had some good conversation. Yeah, it was a really cool experience.
Yeah. And then so from Oklahoma City, we only stayed one night. We didn't really do much there other than have some food, hang out with our couch surfers. And then from Oklahoma City, where did we go?
We drove all the way to Santa Fe.
Yeah, so that drive was through western Oklahoma, which was kind of interesting because the landscape actually changed a lot.
Yeah. Becomes very much more of a prairie-style landscape.
Yeah. And then through northern Texas, stopped in Amarillo for Torchy's Tacos, which if you've been following the podcast, that was a place that we kind of raved about on our road trip to Texas episode. We were really excited to find a Torchy's.
Yeah, one of the great things about being like in the kind of Southwest is that there's amazing Mexican food. And the type of Mexican food we like, which probably isn't actually Mexican food, but breakfast tacos are amazing. So it's really fun to be able to eat some of those in Oklahoma City and visit Torchy's for lunch the same day. Kind of taco ourselves out.
Yeah. And then we got into New Mexico, and the landscape kind of changed right before we got into New Mexico again, where it's like, I don't even know how you describe it, like really dry, kind of barren, kind of sparse plantation.
I mean, it's really like that, the Old West you imagine kind of thing.
Yeah, like where the mountains are sort of like they go up and then they're really flat and then they go down again.
Yeah,
like that sort of style.
And there's like crevasses, and you imagine like cowboys riding through and getting into gunfights with bandits and robbers and things of that nature.
Yeah, Santa Fe's been really cool though. It's like slower pace, smaller town, everything. All the houses are like kind of like whitewashed cement with like the rounded edges, like sort of what you imagine like New Mexico to be like. I don't know. I feel like it's like fulfilled all the stereotypes I had of it, which has been in a good way. What do you think?
Yeah, really good first impression. It's nice being somewhere that's a little less humid. Driving through Oklahoma and Texas, the heat was kind of just overwhelming whenever we stepped out of the car. It was close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
40 C.
Yeah. And really humid, so you'd step out and just be like, and melting. And it's quite hot here too, but it's like a dry heat that's quite a bit more bearable.
Yeah, it also it's a little bit more what we're used to from being from British Columbia and Alberta, where it's a drier heat, and then it cools off a little bit at night. So something that I noticed about being in Atlanta in the late spring going into summer is like it kind of felt like you were in a tropical country. Like it just never really cooled off. It's like your air conditioning gives you like a false sense of coolness outside, and you walk outside and it's just like being smacked in the face with thick, humid air. So it's been nice to feel like the air is a little bit more fresh here.
Yeah, and anyways, we're about to take off and go to Meow Wolf.
Yeah, so we'll check in a little bit later, update y'all on how... I just slipped a y'all in, did you hear it? Update everyone on what we've been up to in Santa Fe and what we think of Meow Wolf. Ciao.
So when we were at T-Bex in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we met a guy from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we were telling him about our road trip. And he was like, oh, when you're in Santa Fe, you've got to go check out Meow Wolf. And we were like, Meow Wolf?
Yeah. I'd like never heard anything about this before, and I'd never really heard anything like it. He described it as an interactive art exhibit, something you could actually like touch and play with and walk on. And he said it was really cool. It was mostly funded by George R.R. Martin, and something that we definitely had to see while we were there.
Yeah, and so we didn't research it at all before going to Santa Fe. We just put it on a to-do list. And so on our first day in Santa Fe, we went over to check it out. And I had kind of imagined something like, kind of like a field full of interesting art stuff, kind of like a Burning Man-esque type scene.
Yeah, and I had in my head like sort of this like adult playground, like interactive art thing outdoors as well. And that's not what it was at all.
Yeah, so Meow Wolf is actually a group of artists in Santa Fe who do high-tech art. And what we were referring to as Meow Wolf is actually called the House of Eternal Return, which is Meow Wolf's, the group's newest art exhibit. And what it is, it's George R.R. Martin funded this project where they bought an old bowling alley and completely redid the inside into this interactive mystery adventure art experience. So when you show up outside, there's a couple interesting sculptures, but it looks like an old bowling alley with this interesting logo on it. And we're like, is this the right place? Is it around back?
Yeah. It was super like, oh, he talked it up so much. Then we show up and it's just like this building with this like kind of weird logo on it. We're like, okay, I guess we'll go in.
Yeah. And then so you go up to the desk and the guy gives you instructions and he's like, just keep going. Like you can come out whenever you need to, just like explore. And we're like, oh, what are we getting ourselves into? But yeah, so what it is, we won't give too much away because it's definitely one of the top things we saw and you should go check it out yourself. But you walk in and the temperature kind of cools down and you're sitting on this yard and it's nighttime you're standing on a yard, it's nighttime and you're looking at the front porch of a house. And it's really well done, even to the climate. And you turn to your right and there's a mailbox and you open up the mailbox and you find out like your first piece of information about what exactly you're doing. And it's kind of a clue to the story. And so the story is there's a family who used to live in this house somewhere in California, and somehow there's a breakdown of the space-time continuum. All these alternate realities have merged onto this house, and then you get to go explore them.
Yeah, so you're trying to figure out what happened to the little boy from the family. And so it's very, very well done. It's very detailed on the inside, but it's kind of like a house that you explore, and then there's all these passageways that you can go through. So the only other thing our friend told us was make sure you go through the fridge and into the fireplace, which he's like, you'll understand when you get there, which, you know, if you're like, what the hell are you talking about? You'll understand when you go. But that's how you kind of get to these like alternate dimensions type things. And there's these really cool interactive things that you can play with and things you can touch and make music with. And it's just a really fun, weird, trippy experience.
Yeah, and you can interact with it on kind of different levels. Like we just went through not really paying attention or even thinking about the fact that it's like a mystery to solve. But it's just really cool. Like there's all these things, like there's a dinosaur skeleton where you can bang on the bones and it makes music. And there's all these other interactive parts where you can make music and just look around at this like super psychedelic space. But then there's also this like mystery layer of it. It seems like the type of place, if you lived there, where you could take, whenever your friends came to town, like you could just take them back and back and back.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so definitely something that we would recommend if you're in the Santa Fe, Albuquerque area. If you're in New Mexico in general, just go to Meow Wolf. It's definitely worth your time. So we just got back into the plaza in Santa Fe after going to Meow Wolf. And so let's talk a little bit about our other experiences in Santa Fe, because Meow Wolf has just been sort of one aspect of that. Like earlier today, we went to Body, which is a sort of like yoga studio cafe place. Hung out at the cafe, I did some yoga, and then we went on a hike. We did the Dorothy Stewart Trail. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, it was a nice short hike with some nice views of Santa Fe and kind of mountains around here.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's really like hot and dry here, and there's not very much like tree coverage or anything because the shrubbery is all kind of low to the ground and kind of sparse. So it was nice to just do a short hike. I think between the altitude and the temperature, it was nice to keep it just to a couple miles, like an hour and a half it took us. But yeah, that's something that I would definitely recommend. So last night for dinner, we had some really good Indian food at Raga, and then had really, really good lunch at Pascal's Cafe, which I would 100% recommend. And now we're waiting to eat at the Shed. So we'll have to report into how that is. It's Mexican food, and it's supposed to be amazing. So looking forward to that. Anything else you want to touch base with?
No, other than tomorrow we're continuing on from Santa Fe up to Utah.
Woohoo, Utah! So excited. Bye. So when we were planning out our road trip originally, something that I really, really wanted to do was to go up to Moab in Utah and to go to Arches National Park. It's something that I've wanted to see for ages and ages. I follow Nat Geo Travel on Instagram, which if you love travel photos, you should follow them. They're pretty inspiring. They've post fantastic photos. And so when I knew that Utah was in driving distance of where we were going, I was like, I really want to go here. Something that we hadn't really considered, though, was that we should probably book this aspect of our trip in advance. We were kind of just playing the trip day to day. We didn't want to book too much in advance in case we decided to stay in a city longer. Something happened with my car. We got stuck somewhere for whatever reason. We didn't end up going there. And so sort of the day before we were going to be in Moab, we decided to look into places to stay.
So we pulled out our laptop and started digging into Airbnb and really found basically zero options in Moab.
I mean, there were a couple options available, maybe 2 or 3, but 300 to 500 Canadian dollars a night.
Yeah, so we were like, oh shoot, maybe we should stay in Colorado or talk about changing our plans altogether. But then eventually we were able to find a place in Blanding, Utah, which is about an hour south of Moab. And it actually ended up working out really well because we found a beautiful apartment attached to someone's house, and then you could just drive up to Moab for the day, explore Arches as much as we wanted, come back, and then carry on the next day to Monument Valley.
Yeah, and it sounds really simple when we put it like that, but it was actually a bit of a process because our original plan was to go to Arches National Park and then to go to Zion National Park, which are about 4.5 hours apart. So originally we were looking at something that was kind of in between them, which is sort of the mid-eastern side of Utah and then the very southwest corner, and just searching Airbnb, hotels, just nothing available for affordable price. And then we kind of tossed around, Ryan was like, what do you want to see most? Do you want to see Arches National Park or Zion National Park? And I mean, I wanted to see both, but I really wanted to see Arches. And so we decided to do Monument Valley instead, and then started looking at like all the little towns that were in between Moab and Monument Valley. And thankfully this beautiful Airbnb showed up in Blanding. And I think that the lesson I learned from it is that planning in advance can always be helpful if there's something that you're really set on doing, but that you can always look into other options if you're willing to be flexible in terms of maybe not staying in that exact place or driving a little bit further or changing your route slightly.
Yeah, and it's something we found with quite a few of the national parks we tried to visit. There's kind of that like one main city that's like the place to stay if you're going, but if you are looking on Couchsurfing or Airbnb or even like Expedia, there's often other cities that wouldn't show up if you search for that thing, but if you pull up the map and look, you can find some good places.
Yeah, definitely.
So we packed up our stuff in Santa Fe and headed up through New Mexico, Colorado, and up to Blanding, Utah.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with Arches National Park, it is just outside of Moab in Utah, which is sort of central, kind of close to the eastern border with Colorado. And it's not a massive national park, but it's really, really spectacular. And it has actually close to 200 arches. And the arches were made over time, obviously. They're very old, but there was a lot of soil, and then the soil was pushed up into more like mountainous sort of structures, and then there was a lot of salt there. And then this is basic geology, just so you guys know. And then because it gets quite cold there, because it's a higher elevation, the coolness actually fractured parts of the rocks, and parts of the rocks that are weaker begin to fall away. And over time, that chisels out the rocks to make really cool sort of spires that come up into the air, sort of phallic looking, if you want to picture them that way. And then also encourages the weaker rocks to fall out and create these really beautiful arches.
Yeah, and so you've probably seen on TV or commercials somewhere these kind of red, almost like clay looking, but big arches of completely made of stone.
Yeah, and something that I thought was really cool about Arches National Park is that so in Georgia, it's famous for like the red clay that's in the earth. And in Arches National Park, the red actually comes from iron. And so it's the oxidation process of iron. So the same way that like something rusts, like a nail would rust and turn red, it's exactly what's happening to the rock. So it's just a lot of really interesting sort of natural things coming together to create this really beautiful area.
Yeah, and the whole area is really nice as well, because you've got Arches National Park there. Not too far away is Canyonlands National Park,
yeah,
which we didn't actually go check out, but from photos we looked at, that's also spectacular views. And kind of nestled right into this valley is the town of Moab, which is kind of just the hub for everyone going out and checking out things in this area.
Yeah, and so you kind of drive through Moab or sort of around Moab to get to Arches. It's right outside. And we waited in a little bit of a line to get in the park, and then we started winding up this road to get a little bit up. And as soon as we got up, we were just greeted with this really spectacular view. It was just, red rock for ages, valleys and cliffs, and those phallic spires that I was describing before kind of all over the place. And you can just see arches just everywhere. And at first I was kind of confused because I couldn't see that many arches. And then the more we drove through it, because we kind of drove through it a couple different times and ways and stopped at all these different viewpoints, I kept noticing more and more arches. And the big blue sky combined with like the beautiful orangey red is just, it's out of this world. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. And I think that for me, it was definitely one of the highlights of the trip.
Yeah, and so we went and hiked up to Delicate Arch, was the very first thing we did in the day. But during the summer, Arches is very busy. So we had been a bit worried going in if we would even be able to park, because they say on their website, like, you can't park during busy peak hours.
Like basically between like 10 and 4, they say it's hard to get parking like at any of the popular hiking destinations.
So our strategy was to go up to Delicate Arch, was a little further away and had a little bit more of a hike than some of the others. And then do that first and then drive around and check out the other ones.
Yeah, and I'd seen, like I said before, a bunch of photos of Delicate Arch before. If you haven't seen it before, I would definitely look up a photo of it. It is so spectacular, and it's so cool to think that this arch was made so long ago. And it's still standing and it's still so strong. And one of the cool things that we learned while we were in the park is how more and more arches continue to be made as more pieces of rock continue to fall. And so we hiked up to Delicate Arch, we hiked down, and then we began making our way through the park. So we made our way as far north in the park as we could, checked out Landscape Arch, which is another famous one, attached to a really big hike that we didn't do the whole full thing. And then we kind of just started driving back, exploring more and more of the park, just stopping wherever we could, learning more about the arches, hiking and walking around. I think the only downside of the day was that it was really hot. Hey?
Yeah, I think it was slightly over 100 degrees, which when you're just walking without like any tree cover, you're like up on a high elevation plateau, red ground, just getting like blasted by the sun.
And no like cloud cover either. It's like completely blue sky.
Yeah, but it was definitely, looking back on it, one of the highlights of the road trip.
Yeah, I would say for me, it was probably the thing that I was most looking forward to going into, and it did not disappoint in any way. So I was completely wowed and blown away by the entire park. And I loved the day that we had there, and I could have definitely gone back and explored for even longer.
So we headed out from Blanding, Utah, and went south on our way to Flagstaff, Arizona. And along the way, there was kind of 3 big national parks that we wanted to see when we were in Utah. Arches, Zion, and then Monument Valley, which isn't actually a national park, but effectively.
It's on like the Navajo native land, so it's a little bit different from a national park.
Yeah, but anyways, we had to cross off Zion just because we didn't have the time to get there, but Monument Valley was directly on our way. So Monument Valley is actually, it's a pretty cool road trip park because it doesn't really require much actual like getting off your route. Like it's right along the way. You pull down the highway and there's this really iconic view as you kind of come up over a hill and then start to head downhill. And there's kind of this long, straight 2-lane road, and out in the distance are these like gigantic rock
sculptures almost. I know sculptures is the wrong word.
Just big ass rocks.
Yeah, that are like in really cool shapes, and it makes me wonder how they got there. It seems like, you know, glaciers or water or something chiseled them out over years and years, which is pretty amazing. But like you were saying, one of the coolest parts about Monument Valley is that you actually don't even have to pay to go in if you don't want to, because you can get this really spectacular view just being on the road driving towards it.
Yeah, and so I think that's a good point. Like we ended up paying to go in, but we just went to the visitor center, didn't really like do too much exploring, because at Monument Valley there's kind of like a dirt road track that you can spend a couple hours driving around to get good views. But I think I would have just been happy purely just driving by and seeing it from the way we saw it.
Yeah, definitely. We got a really good view from it, and there's some pull-offs too, so you can like safely pull off the road and take some really good photos of it. I think the other thing to note is like if you're going to go in, you should probably have like a decent car to do it with. I had kind of read mixed reviews about whether or not like your typical like 4-wheel drive car could do it. 2-wheel drive car could do it. My car was so weighted down that we're like, it can't really handle any big bumps, and it's going to add a lot of time to our drive. So we decided not to do the road on the inside and just went to the visitor center, got a different view of the park. But that element was definitely not necessary for somebody just driving through.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny pulling up to Monument Valley. You could see them in the distance approaching, and then you're like, okay, this is the spot where there's that like really famous view of people kind of like standing on the street with the monument rocks in the background. So we pull off the road kind of directly behind a small tour bus, which is full of Asian tourists, as it turns out. So we get out and we're like, okay, we'll like run over into the road, take a quick photo. But this whole gang of Asian folks is just like
sitting in the middle of the road,
all
taking
over the road.
photos.
There's cars coming both directions, but these guys are like sitting down in the road, waiting for photos, and it's almost like playing a game of chicken because there's like a big truck coming one way.
I mean, it wasn't that bad. Like, there was a big gang of them in the middle of the road, and there wasn't that much traffic. Plus, people were driving pretty slow. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, I think it's just a good example of a cultural difference where, like, so we hopped in the middle of the road really quickly to take photos, and then I was like, you know what? Screw it. All these people are sitting on the road.
Yeah,
I want a photo sitting in the middle of the road too. Like, why not?
We actually ended up doing the same thing, but it was just kind of funny to see this scene of like probably like 20 people all over this, which is effectively a highway.
I thought it was funny too how they would like go and take a photo, and then it's like they'd look at it and have some sort of conversation and like hop back in the middle of the road and like take a second one as if the first one wasn't good enough.
Yeah, and it's also this funny game because there was probably like at least 4 cars pulled over and then this little mini bus, and everyone wants that like unobstructed photo where it's just like nothing but road and like one person in it. So a car would come by and everyone has to scramble out of the road, and then people would run back into the road, but you want to be in that very first spot so you can get that unobstructed view. So it's kind of like this game that was going on for like the 10 minutes we were waiting there.
Yeah, we kind of observed it for a while before we partook, and then we partook and got out before it was even finished, which is kind of funny. But Monument Valley was like, it was so spectacular. I would say if you're ever driving through like the northern Arizona, southern Utah area, definitely make a stop in Monument Valley. It's technically in Utah, but like
it's like right on the border.
You really cross the border as soon as you leave like the Navajo Reserve.
Yeah, definitely worth making a detour for. And then you're also in the neighborhood there of some other pretty cool attractions which we didn't actually get to see. As we were heading towards Flagstaff from Utah, there is Meteor Crater, which is a gigantic crater created by a gigantic space rock that flew out of space and smashed into Earth.
Yeah. You do have to pay to get into it, though, just as a heads up.
And then there's also the Petrified Forest, which is another big road trip destination.
And do you know what the Petrified Forest is?
I believe it's a petrified forest. if my sources are correct.
Okay. I'm not too certain exactly what that entails.
Haven't seen any pictures, but apparently it's cool.
Yeah, so something to know if we had not detoured up to Utah, we would have driven right through the Petrified Forest. It's right like on the interstate.
And if we had a bit more time, we would have gone to Meteor Crater as well.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And so from Monument Valley, we continued on our way and made our way into Flagstaff. And the reason for our stopover in Flagstaff was because one of Ryan's coworkers, is actually relocated there. And so it was cool to stop and visit a friend and go for dinner with a familiar face after being on the road for had we been on the road for like about a week at that point?
Slightly longer.
Yeah, and it was like just the two of us for the entire time. So it was really nice to like hang out with some other people and check out like a cool city in Arizona. Yeah,
really cool town. And it's funny, I had such a terrible conception of what Arizona actually was like, because I imagine Arizona and I think like Phoenix desert, hot. Flagstaff is actually
retired people.
Flagstaff is actually like, right up in the mountains, high elevation, so it's quite temperate there in the summer and gets a lot of snow in the winter, so it kind of will mess with your understanding of what Arizona is all about.
Yeah, for sure. It was a pretty cool little place though.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about going on a road trip, especially somewhere like the US, where you're going through so many cool cities, is that you can find opportunities to meet up with people you know. And so this was like a really good break for us to do that.
Yeah.
Then the other awesome thing about Flagstaff is that it's the jump off point for going to the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon's like an hour and a half away, I think.
About an hour 15 to the park on the south rim.
Just north. So we went up there. We were heading somewhere else after the Grand Canyon, so we didn't have a ton of time there. We were just going to stop and do a hike. And someone recommended to us the Kebab Trail.
Kebab? Hey Bob, kebab.
So yeah, we cruised up to the Grand Canyon, also a very busy spot to go in the summer. Went for a hike, And then,
as you would expect.
yeah, I mean, it's the Grand Canyon. It's not called the Canyon. So we actually did a recording live from the Grand Canyon, and we will play that for you.
See you there.
Da-doop-doop-da-doop-doop.
So we just finished hiking the Rim Trail, the Grand Canyon, and then down onto the South Kabob Trail. And it was pretty spectacular, but it's, you know, well into the 30s here, Celsius. It's pretty hot, it's pretty dry. I'm pretty beat. What about you?
Yeah, it's been like a few days now in Utah and Arizona of just like blistering heat. So
yeah, and quite a lot of activity too, between Arches National Park and stopping to check out Monument Valley, and hanging out in Flagstaff, and now coming to the Grand Canyon. And we decided to drive up to the Grand Canyon, obviously, and then we parked at the visitor center, and then we just started walking. So we walked about 2 miles along the rim before we started heading down into the canyon. And you can actually go all the way down to the base, is that correct? Down to the Colorado River?
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the middle of the day, so it's just a little bit too hot for that. We weren't really prepared to do that, but we went about halfway to... Not halfway?
No.
How far did we
It's
go?
like a mile.
How far is the whole way down?
It's like longer than it. It would be very, very long day hike, I think, to go all the way in and back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just reading the visitor center that it's from the top to the bottom is 3 of the Empire State Building, which is pretty spectacular. If anyone's been to New York, then you've got a pretty good comprehension of how deep that is. From the top, you actually can't see the bottom in most places, and even getting down to the vista or the viewpoint that we went down to called Ua, you couldn't really tell how deep it was.
Yeah, and so for anyone who hasn't been to the Grand Canyon, obviously, it's not like one sheer canyon. It's kind of like, it's really long, so there's different spots. It looks different in different areas, but kind of like a sheer cliff wall, and then kind of like a bit of like a gradient slope, and then more cliff, and then like gradient again, and then like more cliff, and so much so that you can like barely even see the bottom, like the true bottom where the river is. I don't think we saw the Colorado River at all.
No, I didn't. But it is something that I've really wanted to see for...
The Grand Canyon or the Colorado River?
Oh, sorry, the Grand Canyon, not the Colorado River. I've wanted to see the Grand Canyon for years and years, and so it's pretty amazing to finally have that experience.
Why did you want to see the Grand Canyon?
Just because it's like massive canyon, pretty impressive views. I just thought it would be really cool to see. I really like seeing spectacular things in nature. I think more so than like buildings or cities. I really like really cool things in nature. I know I felt the same way seeing Delicate Arch in Arches National Park. It's like, wow, I've seen so many photos of this, and now I'm finally seeing it myself. It seems like you're a little bit hard to impress. Were you impressed by the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, I mean, compared to our other canyon experiences.
Yeah, so for anyone who's been following the podcast for a while, we did an episode on the Colca Canyon, which is just outside of Arequipa in Peru, and I had moments where I really felt like it was kind of Colca Canyon-esque as we were like meandering down the side of the Grand Canyon, moving out of the way for like people on donkeys coming up, which is something that happens at the Colca Canyon. But the Grand Canyon is just so much more spectacular.
Yeah, and one thing that I had worried about coming in was that there might be just big crowds and not much space to like actually get out and like, enjoy the view. But there's kind of the one main viewpoint right by the visitor center on the south rim that is like a little busy, but like once you get maybe 200 meters either direction from that, it's quiet. There's tons of spots where you can go take awesome photos, and then when you go hiking, it's really not that busy at all.
Yeah, I think that that's actually a really good thing to point out, because I think that sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, there's going to be a bunch of like RVers and like old people and people with selfie sticks and that sort of thing. Kind of like, you know, it's like not ideal when you're trying to like just enjoy something and there's people kind of shoving you out of the way, or you get 1 second to take a photo and then you've kind of got to get out of the way because there's so many people. And it was like pretty busy right at the main viewpoint, like you said, but then just like not, the hike wasn't even busy. Like we moved out of the way for a set of donkeys one time, but other than that, it was like pretty chill, like enough people that it wasn't like if something had happened there'd be people, but not too busy.
So what was your impression of the Grand Canyon compared to expectations going in?
Yeah, I mean, it's like almost bigger than I imagined. Like, I knew it would be big, but it's hard to put into perspective how big it is, I think, from seeing photos. Like, photos just don't really show the magnitude of it.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, it's really, really wide, really, really deep. And it is kind of hard to take a photo that kind of, like, captures the background.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes in, like, both directions. Like, even a panorama, it's like you're going from side to side and it just keeps going. And it's kind of interesting because you were saying, like, oh, I thought it was, like, not that wide. And it's still, like, it's really wide and, like, super, super long. But somebody was telling us, because when they were asking us what we were going to do, our friends in Flagstaff that we saw last night were asking us our plans, and I was like, oh yeah, we're going to go to the South Rim, then maybe drive to the North Rim. And he was like, oh, you know, that's like a 4.5 hour drive. And I was like, I did not know that. So it's not something that you can just like drive around quite easily. Like, it's massive. You're laughing at me as if that's like super obvious. I think it's easy to forget like how big something is, though.
Anyways, so the Grand Canyon is kind of a stopover for us. We spent last night in Flagstaff, and we're going to Las Vegas tonight for 2 nights.
Yeah, so sort of breaking up the national park thing that we've been doing the last couple days was sort of the big city thing, and then heading into Yosemite after that, so back to the national parks. And so we'll check in a little bit later. So that concludes part 1 of our road trip episode from Atlanta to Alberta, and we will start from Vegas next week.
We continue on from the Grand Canyon up to Las Vegas, California, Oregon, Idaho.
You forgot Washington. Yeah.
Alberta.
Yeah.
Also BC as well.
Oh, yeah.
We went everywhere.
Lots more adventures to be talked about on the next episode, so stay tuned for next week. Ciao.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast and would like to support The World Wanderers, you can head to patreon.com/theworldwanderers, where you can join the team, support the show, and help us create awesome content that's valuable for you guys, the listeners.